Can a Stoic be a Christian? That's what we're going to talk about today. Hi, this is Jill from the North Woods, recounting advice that changes lives. Today we're going to follow up with last week. In grade school, I became a Stoic. I started reading about it. I came through Greek philosophy, and suddenly I learned about Stoicism, and I was sold on it. So I was very, very into it throughout my life. And I think that it helped me quite a bit through all the things that were going on in my family, all the things that were going on in my life. Through Stoicism, it helped me become a stronger person. But then the question comes along, can a Christian be a Stoic? And so we're jumping ahead a little bit because it was college I became a Christian. And I spent a lot of time thinking, well, you're really into Stoicism. Do these two still gel at all? And I took a long look at it, and I decided there are places where they blend. And first of all, the world's a small place. Even back then, people traveled, merchants traveled, ideas exchanged between locations. It had influences. And not only that, the Greeks invaded the land of Israel like 330 AD, 330 BC, and then the Romans ate the Greeks, and then the Romans became very Greek-like. And so these philosophies lasted. Where Stoicism seemed to go to me is that you saw emperors like Marcus Aurelius, but then slaves like Epictetus. It started attracting all sorts of different people from all different walks of life. And so it, of course, would attract Christians and non-Christians alike. But we're going to talk a little bit about the differences and where we part and where we actually meet up. I mean, Stoicism is agnostic. It came to a point, I think, in Greek times. There were so many gods. They were so vengeful and angry, and they didn't fulfill their promises. And they started becoming fallen away from Greek religion, from Roman religion. And there were a lot of people who were just denouncing gods, afterlife, everything completely. And Stoicism gave them a good way that, you know what, life is tough. We got to suck it up and go with it. And so Stoicism really came big apart that. But we still can live a virtuous life. We still can emphasize values and virtues, even if we don't believe in gods. And that's really where it came out. Now, Christianity, of course, is a faith-based belief. Believe in Jesus Christ. His grace has saved us. He cares for us. He wants us to be there with him. And we'll find, and I'll talk about it later, many people who were emotional in the Bible. It is also a faith of emotions. Even though Stoicism strives self-reliance, controlling your emotions, and self-control. So we'll talk a little bit about where they match up and where they don't. Now, Stoics, of course, believed that all things are fated, which is kind of funny because they didn't believe in God. While Christianity acknowledges that God has sovereignty, but we still have free choice as human beings. The whole faith is based on free choice. And in fact, I was listening to a podcast a couple weeks ago, was asking, why does God ask us to pray? Because he wants us to be involved in his world, in society, in other people's lives, and in our own lives. This is not just about God determining ahead of time how we're fated to be. Then there's also some differences between whether evil exists. We, in Christianity, are very aware of the problem of evil, the need for redemption, the need for this. While Stoicism just says, well, you know what? Evil is evil. People do evil stuff, and there's no rhyme or reason to it. And so that's another big part of it. Where they tend to overlap more is there is a very high virtue ethics. Both Christianity and Stoicism play a high emphasis on wisdom, courage, justice, very specific virtues, self-control, all those things. Very important to both of them. They both also seek meaning in the life. Whether in the Greek and the Roman Stoicism, it was philosophical guidance, the meaning of life. What is a perfect society? What's the perfect government? How do people react to each other? How should trials react among people of peers and people of power? But in the case of faith, we seek meaning in terms of God and in terms of Jesus. Now I have a plumb line that measures everything else. And so meaning is found in that. But I also get meaning from virtue, inner peace, resilience, self-control. Both of them are big into self-discipline and believe that we should tame our minds, our passions, the speech coming out of our mouth, our actions to other people, our actions towards God. Both Stoicism and Christianity focus on what to do about pain. How does pain and suffering either cause us to grow or cause us to have compassion towards other people? And that kind of works together. Now, again, Christianity is based on serving God, and Stoicism is based on serving yourself and maybe serving others, but not in the same way. So there's tensions, but I think what it is for me is that, again, these areas influenced each other. They lived in close proximity. Ideas came out. People will oftentimes talk about Athens versus Jerusalem. First of all, God is number one with me, but Athens, yes, too. Athens had some things to teach us. It's not that every wise thing that ever came out of somebody's mouth in the history of mankind was Christian. Very many wise things come from Christians, but not everything. And if you know anything about me, I am the extractor of ideas. I read books from Christians, from non-Christians, from this point of view and that point of view. And it's not that it's going to budge me from my faith, but I feel like I'm that orange juice extractor. I'm going to take what's good out of it, what applies to me, and use it. And then the parts that don't apply to me or go against my faith, I don't. I mean, that's just how it goes. And I think that's how we read all books. We take from it where it impacts us and we leave the rest. Maybe we put it in the little back corner of our mind to think about a little bit more or think about additionally, but we don't have to let those things happen. So in Stoicism, we have internal peace. We have what is called apatheia, which is apathetic, right? That word comes from, but freedom from passion or emotional disturbances, that emotions have to be trained out of people. But the difference here is that Christianity believes that emotions are part of who we are. Jesus had emotions. He laughed, he wept, he was an emotional human being. And so that leads me to believe that God the Father himself, the Holy Spirit, also emotional. But what's the difference between that? They had compassion, joy, righteous anger. Jesus wept, Jesus grieved, Jesus got angry. The Holy Spirit loves, has joy, peace, patience. But does Stoicism mean that we just control what some term passions, which would be then more anger, lust, rage? I think emotions that lead us to bad decisions, lead us to places where we shouldn't go in life. Well, yeah, absolutely. Christianity is not for that either. So that is kind of the difference between it. So if you say Stoicism is about not feeling anything, then yeah, maybe it's contradictory. Or if you say, like me, Stoicism is about not being ruled by emotions, but instead, I'm ruled by faith. I'm ruled by reading the scriptures, by thought. God gave me a brain. He also gave us emotions too. But what are we ruled by? That's the important part. Paul says we shouldn't be ruled by flesh and get out of control and angry. He talks about self-control is a fruit of the Spirit. We saw him talk about how you shouldn't dress in fancy ways and rich ways. Don't wear gold beads in your hair, but dress simply. Be good with everyone. Show empathy and trust and peacefulness. And as much as it is up to you, be peaceful with everybody. That's kind of the differences between it. So we both feel in some ways that when we feel something, we bring it to God, we're transformed by it, but we don't let it overwhelm us, either in grief or in pride or in anger. You can see that balance there, and that's where it sticks with me. So in Stoicism itself, even though it's not a religion, it's not theistic, it doesn't believe in a God, Still many good teachings, lifestyle ideas, attitudes towards suffering, attitudes on how to overcome suffering, virtue. That all resonates with me. I'm right there. I am with that 100%. So Stoicism helps me in that sense have that relationship with the people around me in a calm, measured, non-fighting, non-eruptive way. And that's what it really means to me. I think too, I believe that suffering helps us grow. I know, and I said it in other podcasts, that I could look back at my life saying, wouldn't it have been nice if I had parents who were stable? Or wouldn't it have been nice if I had a home that was comforting, a refuge for me? It wasn't that way. But it also made me very agile to misfortune, hardships, struggling, difficulties. It's very hard in a lot of ways to crack me. I can, but it is difficult because I have had so many things go wrong in my life that it becomes much harder to do. I am resilient because of this. I think of ways out of things. Now, that's another place where I think Stoicism maybe harms my Christian walk just a little bit. Because let's say something bad happens to me tomorrow. I'm going to be, what can I do? How can I plan around this? What can I do to get out of this situation? What's missing? My prayer. What about going to God? Instead of me trying to figure out what it is I must do in order to get out of it. And so sometimes both my upbringing and Stoicism makes me try to be too independent. And I know that's a weakness of mine. So I try to remember, always bring God back into this, pray about this, hope for that, and see him as a part of our lives. Stoicism was very big also into human brothership, relationships. We're citizens, we're together in things, and Christianity calls us to be a church together. It calls us to be brothers and sisters. It calls us to care for everyone, whether they are Christians or not Christians, whether they're rich or poor, whether this or that. We should care for everybody. So there is this idea of brotherhood in there, that everyone's a brother. That next person next to me, they're no better, they're no worse than I am. So that's how it is too. Stoics were very much into simple living. They were not into luxury, excess. They were focused on living modestly, dressing modestly. And we saw, I think, in Epicureanism, the best. We should look for the best in life. And they're saying, no, that's not necessarily true. This was a reaction to excess and luxury in their own lives. And Jesus also models humility, warns against riches, warns against how difficult it is for a rich person to enter kingdom. I think because of that, well, I can figure out money ways to get over whatever problem I'm in instead of me depending on God. And we saw interactions of them. Paul in Acts 17, he debated the Stoic philosophers. So while he challenged their theology, his letters often reflected a Stoic tone to it, that we should look for virtue, the seeds of truth, that we should have calm lives, ethical lives, that we shouldn't live in extremes, that we should be quiet in our communities as we do our diligence in our work and helping others. There were some very many Stoic aspects to the letters of Paul. And even Justin Martyr, Tertullian, and Clement saw Stoicism as seeds of truth planted out there in the world. Now, I believe that God was there from the very beginning, planted these seeds of truth through all of humanity, and we retain them. They come up and they come from people who don't necessarily believe in God. The light is still there. The seeds are still there. And I see that even if someone has fallen away from God, you can kind of see those God moments right in there. But I also think that you see other philosophies inside of Christianity, again, seeds of it, grace, grit, getting away from your worst passions in life, the fruit of the Spirit, having virtue, having power in gentleness, and having calmness as being a part of you, but also giving up things that lead us to extremes. If your money is causing you to sin, get rid of it. If your right hand causes you to sin, get rid of it. I mean, don't cut off your hand, but you understand the most important thing are not these objects. Seneca once said, we are waves of the same sea. We're all in this together. But Jesus also says, love your neighbor as yourself. We are all in this. Jesus wants everybody to be a part of it. So these philosophies are not mixed up, but they learn from each other, and people took aspects, just like I try to take aspects of them, as that's a great idea, that's a good thought. And whether it is you're talking about Athens or Greece, whether you're talking about Stoicism or the wisdom that we find in the Bible, there's good parts in there too. Now, Zeno, who was the originator of most of Stoicism, he was the first person to think of it. He lived centuries after the Hebrew Bible, but there's definitely laughs over it. Like I said, these people weren't raised in isolation. Ideas got around through trades, through shipping, through exploration, those kinds of things. So there it is. But you can look at some of the Old Testament themes and think about Proverbs or Ecclesiastes or Job. They all lived and talked about suffering in human life and how do we respond to suffering. When we talk about the deep alignment of the moral and spiritual world of the universe, that is a very big part of the Hebrew Testament, but it's also very Stoic. We also see people who were very controlled. Joseph, controlled. Sometimes when David was showing righteousness, he was restrained rather than revenge. We've seen that in parts of it. Ecclesiastes warns about letting your emotions control you. A fool, in Proverbs it says, a fool gives full vent to his spirit, but a wise man quietly holds back. Job, again, was there. Lamentations, Psalms, has a lot of stoicism built into it. And just so you know how close they are, it's about 750 miles from Jerusalem to Athens, if you were a crow. We're not crows. But if you were walking, it would probably take you more like 1,000 to 1,200 miles. And let's say that you could, as people did back in the day, walk 20 to 25 miles a day. I could not do that. And day after day, it would take a lot. It would take 45 to 60 days, depending on how fit you were, to walk through these places. And it also would change if you stopped in Antioch or Ephesus. But walks were possible. People got around. Ideas got around. And so they all worked with each other. And I guess I said it before that the Stoics in general didn't believe in gods and didn't believe in an afterlife. Some of them did believe in an impersonal God, and they did believe that the soul was never ending. But it's not like Jesus and God the Father, who are personal gods who care for us, look after us, want to hear our prayers. And the afterlife is nothing like what they thought of as an afterlife. So it is different for sure. And Stoicism, believers that everything physical was unimportant. There was another school of thought that believed, and that was the Gnostics, that the body was evil and everything spiritual was good. And in this case, it wasn't that it was evil. It is just unimportant. It's a temporary vessel. You can do to me what you will because it's my mind is where I live. Jesus cares about the body. He cares about the mind. He cares about the soul. So it's a little bit more expanded in that sense. The body is sacred. The bodily resurrection is there. So there is also another type of difference. When you look at Stoicism, and this is true of a lot of cultures, by the way, history is cyclical. It repeats in this process. We go through times of tyranny, and then there's revolution, and then there's times of freedom, and then it goes back to tyranny or something like that. This cyclical nature of it, that there's no end of history, there's just this constant reoccurrence. But in Christianity and Judaism both, time is a linear piece. It goes from here to there. There was, in the beginning, a plan, and Jesus was part of it. And it carries out, and you'll find also throughout much of the Bible, talks about kairos, which is the time. The time has come, not like the time on your watch, but the event is here. Talks about the birth pangs of a new world, of a new kingdom. Time is not repeating itself. It goes from point A to point B. And when talking about when people do something wrong, moral agency and justice, a lot of times Stoicism believed that there was a logical problem. There was a misunderstanding of reason. You could sort of see how this affected me as a kid because I look at my parents or my dad who drank too much and said, oh, he is having a reaction to the situation he grew up in. But we also understand in Christianity, evil is real. There is an enemy force out there that is causing evil, that is encouraging evil. We ourselves are doing evil, and justice is important. Justice is important for all of eternity. God cares about people getting justice. Rich, poor, men, women, Jew, Gentile, everybody should get justice no matter what. So that's a little bit of a difference too. There have been some people who are modern Stoics that are big into it, but there's also Christians who are at least admiring Stoics. And they have been fans and philosophers for a long time. So it's not like it's been separated. Pretty much from the early church until modern times, there are people who admire both of them. I see Stoicism in C.S. Lewis from time to time, where if you look at the Screwtape Letters, there's a lot of themes in there about discipline, vigilance, humility, and so you'll see some of that in there. Now, Ryan Holiday writes about Stoicism. He has many, many books about it. He's not a Christian at all, but many Christians, including me, have read some of his books and found some of his exercises of moral clarity, mental strength useful. So that's a big part of it. And there's another fellow named Peter Kreeft, who's a Catholic philosopher. I don't know him. I have not read his writings. But he has talked about how Christianity does have some compatibility with ancient philosophies, including Stoicism. But Christianity adds the love. That's where it's a little bit different. Admiral Stockdale, he was an important admiral in the military. I won't go into his history. Was a vice presidential candidate, but devout Christian, Stoic thinker, and he used that thinking when he was a POW in Vietnam. And that gave him resilience in it, both his faith and Stoicism. I don't know him. Like I said, I have not read his writing in there. But we also see good practices. We will see things like journaling. We both journal, Christians and Stoics. Voluntary discomfort, fasting, silence. There's the monastic traditions, which I'm not a big fan of, but there's all sorts of ideas that were brought out as part of it. And we still carry those things today. And I even think about when Jesus was going through his final week in Jerusalem and he was getting cast against all these accusations that weren't true. He was having a trial that was unfair. And what did he do? He didn't speak a word. He stood there and took it. When Pilate says, aren't you going to answer them? Aren't you going to talk about what they're accusing you of? He stood there. And I think that in a lot of ways, the Romans and the Gentiles, who would have been reading particularly Mark and Luke, would have appreciated that. This is a tough guy, even to the very end of his death. Pilate probably saw 1 million people, well, not 1 million, beg for their lives, fall before him, break down in tears, ask to be forgiven, and Jesus stood there and took it. I think the Greeks and the Romans would have appreciated all of that. Jesus was a very emotional person, wept, prayed, begged with God, talked to God. There are places where he was also very calm, very stoic, or even wouldn't answer a question when he was trying to be put into a trap. And the Pharisees were like, give me a sign. And he said, I'm not going to give you a sign. Your sign is the sign of Jonah, and gave them a passage to the Old Testament that they would have understood. And I think the last part where things, like I said, differ for me is this fact that at times Jesus was emotional. He wept, he cried, he had joy. The difference is he didn't let his emotions take control of him. It didn't stop him from his mission. It didn't stop him from what he was supposed to do. David, when he was under control, he was very calm, controlled, measured, didn't seek revenge. He had 2 opportunities to kill Saul. One of them, I was in that cave. He didn't, and he controlled his emotions. But there were times when he lost his emotions. He wrote many of the Psalms, and you can hear that emotion in there. There were people like Hannah who prayed, weeping tears. You couldn't even understand a word she said. She was so distraught. And so the next big difference of it all is that Stoicism is about self-control. But Christianity, also being about self-control, understands we are emotional beings. We have an emotional God. We have a God who cares about our emotions, listens to our prayers when we can't even utter the words out of our mouth because we are so emotional. He understands that at times we are taken over by emotions, and he helped those people. He dealt with those people. The only time where he would not react to people was when they were asking a disingenuous question, when they were lying, when they were trying to trick him into something. But when you see people who were desperate for help, he helped them where they were at with their emotions intact. So while controlling your emotions is good and helps you live that virtuous life, it's not everything. And we do believe we are loved by God. We are loved by an emotional God, and we are an emotional people. And sometimes that emotion comes through. We have seen it with so many different people in the Bible. So I think that's, to me, the biggest difference is we have to understand we're not robots. We're not AI. We can't just blurt out answers like we're some sort of a robot system. God understands us for the emotional beings we are. We just have to know when we take those emotions and not let them lead us astray. All right, so there you have it. That's my take on Stoicism and Christianity. Like I said, I did a lot of research when I became a Christian. I was a little concerned, like, boy, this really helped me throughout my entire life. Do I have to leave this? And the answer is no. I have to think about things differently than I do before. People are emotional. Sometimes we don't always live virtuous lives. Sometimes we talk to God about our emotions. But there are places where it overlaps, and where we overlap, I'm all for it. So I hope that helps. Please remember that you can always email me at jill@startwithsmallsteps.com. I would love to hear from you. If you're a Stoic person, let me know. Or you can leave a comment right here in the chat. I would love to hear from you, have a dialogue about this. Appreciate you listening. Have a great day.